Good morning and welcome from Mission Control Houston and today's Friday edition of the International Space Station Update Hour. You're getting a live look now inside of the flight control room here at the Johnson Space Center as the Orbit 2 team is currently on console, monitoring systems on the orbiting laboratory while the astronauts work hard up in space. That Orbit 2 team today is being led by Flight Director Emily Nelson there on the right side of your screen, and she is joined by Capcom Jay Marshke, serving as the voice connection between controllers here on the ground and the crew members up in space. And those astronauts right now are the Expedition 30 crew, and they are being led by NASA astronaut and Expedition 30 Commander Dan Burbank there in the front left of your screen. And then behind him are Russian cosmonauts Anton Shkaplerov and Anatoly Ivanishin, who joined him on the station back in November on their Soyuz spacecraft. On the right side, starting in the front row, is another Russian cosmonaut, Oleg Kononenko, and behind him on the left is European astronaut Andrei Kuipers, and to the right is NASA astronaut Don Pettit. The crew wrapping up a very busy week on board the station, even with an off-duty day on Monday, following some heavy cargo unloading from that recently docked Progress spacecraft. Commander Dan Burbank on Monday had just a few tasks. He worked with the integrated cardiovascular system, which looks to measure heart atrophy in these astronauts during their long-duration space flights, and also doing some reaction self-tests right when he woke up, which helps to see if any of the daily effects of fatigue are having negative effects on the astronaut's performance. Anton Shkaplerov worked with the immuno experiment, which he would go on to work on throughout the week, and that is a Russian research project looking at changes in stress and immune responses during a stay and after a stay on board the station. Russian cosmonaut Anatoly Ivanishin just did some software refresh work on one of the laptops on board the International Space Station. Again, being an off-duty day for the crew, they were fairly relaxed. And then the final Russian cosmonaut, Oleg Kononenko, did some routine coolant maintenance in the Zvezda service module. Andrei Kuipers worked with the Earth knowledge acquired by middle school students, or EarthCam, setting that up and activating it in the station's window observational research facility. And then Don Pettit on Monday worked also with the integrated cardiovascular alongside Dan Burbank, setting up some of the monitors and then downloading the data to researchers on the ground. Moving on to Tuesday, Commander Dan Burbank worked with the binary colloidal alloy test, or BCAT, doing some sample homogenization, mixing them together. And that BCAT test is fairly complex and looks at using microscopic particles known as colloids as models for studying the fundamental physics of the liquid crystal phase. He also participated in an educational event with the ASA ELO Intermediate School, talking to students and relaying some of the experiences he's had so far on board the station. Russian cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov continued work with that immuno experiment, taking blood and saliva samples, which are then stored again to determine any changes in the stress and immune responses of these astronauts during and after their expedition stays. He also did some work unloading cargo from that Progress 46 spacecraft that docked last Friday. Anatoly Ivanishin did some routine maintenance on the Russian toilet on board the station and also worked on the electron system, which generates some of the oxygen that the astronauts are actively breathing. And then Oleg Kononenko tested out one of the control panels in the Pirs docking compartment as some of the work being done on the upcoming Russian EVA, or extravehicular activity, or more commonly known as a spacewalk, which is coming up here on February 16th. He also did some cargo unloading from that Progress spacecraft alongside with Anton Shkaplerov, who will be joining him on that spacewalk. Andrei Kuipers worked with one of the human research facilities, specifically doing a replacement of the pulmonary function system. This helps to measure the respiratory and cardiovascular systems in the astronauts, and measures this through taking readings off of different respired gases that can contain significant concentrations of nitrogen and water vapor. The last member of the crew, Don Pettit, on Tuesday started his work with the capillary flow experiment. Seen here, it's a fluid physics experiment that investigates capillary flow and flows of different fluids in these containers with very complex geometries. It's one of the future tech research projects going on board the station, and results will help improve future flow systems on as yet built spacecrafts. Moving on to Wednesday, Commander Dan Burbank spent much of his day working on the high rate communication system with some very complex cable routing operations, and also began work on the SOLO or sodium loading experiment, which has the astronauts follow a diet of constant either low or normal sodium intake and increase fluid consumptions to study the mechanisms of fluid and salt retention in the human body during spaceflight. Anton Shkaplerov worked some more on the immuno experiment, collecting some more samples, and also reviewed his preliminary spacewalk timeline, which will have him and Oleg Kononenko step out for a 6-hour spacewalk on February 16th, attaching some debris shields to the Zvezda service module and relocating one of the cranes from the Pirs docking compartment to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Zvezda module. Third Russian cosmonaut Anatoly Ivanishin did some inspection and photography of the Zvezda service module's windows, and also did some filter replacement on the dust collectors in Zarya. Meanwhile, Andrei Kuipers did some body mass measurements using the SLAM device, SLAM standing for Space Linear Acceleration Mass Measurement Device, which uses 2 springs to generate a known force against a crew member while they are mounted on an extension arm, and then the resulting acceleration is used to calculate the astronaut's mass. As you cannot have a scale in this microgravity environment, it's one of the only ways available on station to take these calculations. Don Pettit did his first day of working with the Lego bricks experiment on Wednesday, building a model rocket, and the Lego bricks uses the famous building block kits that you can find here down on Earth, and then they are flown to the station and assembled on orbit to demonstrate various scientific concepts. And then some of these models include satellites, a space shuttle orbiter, and even a scale model of the International Space Station. And then the crew records videos for downlink and then sharing throughout the country with schools for students to enjoy. Moving on to Thursday, Commander Dan Burbank started work with the VO2 Max Portable Pulmonary Function System. VO2 Max looks at studying the changes in the astronaut's aerobic capacity during long-duration spaceflight. He also helped out with some tool gathering for that upcoming spacewalk and participated in an educational event talking with the United States Coast Guard Academy and 4 schools across the country. Anton Shkaplerov continued his work in preparation for that upcoming spacewalk, gathering tools and conferring with specialists in the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov, as they again prepare for that February 16th excursion out of the Pirs docking compartment. Anatoly Ivanishin continued with some routine maintenance work on the Zarya module, cleaning ventilation screens, and then did a water transfer and disinfectant operation on one of the Zvezda storage tanks. Oleg Kononenko also joined Shkaplerov in that EVA, or extravehicular activity preparation, and also worked with the Uragan experiment, which is a Russian research project that looks at predicting, determining, and following both man-made and natural disasters. Andrei Kuipers joined Commander Burbank in working on that SOLO, that sodium loading diet experiment, taking some biological samples, as well as participating in an educational event with the Mission X competition, which has students in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, and Portugal all learning about fitness and training like astronauts for a number of weeks in a competition. The final crew member, Don Pettit, did some work on the Space Sakura experiment with flight controllers in Japan, recording the floating state of cherry blossoms in microgravity. And that brings us to today, Friday, the end of the week. Commander Burbank is taking some more solo samples for that sodium diet experiment, and also working some more with the VO2 Max experiment protocols, shown here. and that VO2 max measures the changes in the astronaut's aerobic capacity. Anton Shkaplerov is gathering some more tools for that upcoming spacewalk with Kononenko and going over the procedures, and then the two will configure the Pirs airlock for their upcoming spacewalk. Anatoly Ivanishin is working with the Russian relaxation experiment, which uses two plasma contactor units installed on the US Z1 truss or backbone of the station, and that helps to determine the effects of propulsion system exhaust on the Earth's upper atmosphere and the station environments with optically sensitive surfaces such as windows, equipment lenses, and solar array panels. Andrei Kuiper is also working on that solo experiment. Did some work with the Express Rack 4, which had a computer failure just the other day. He's rebooting that, as well as unpacking some of the US items from that visiting Progress spacecraft. And then the final crew member of Expedition 30 today will be downloading some video and data from the integrated cardiovascular monitoring system, as well as participating in another Lego bricks experiment. And that will bring a wrap to the crew's activities for the week. Expedition 30